Go ahead and find your way back to your seats again, if you would. We'll get started again. Move it. Are we good to go there, brother? Let me clarify something real quick. I had someone send me a question on this that's watching online. Um, yes, Adam was physically alone, and the Bible talks about that throughout the rest of the chapter there as he was alone and God made a help meet for him. But when I talk about aloneness, I'm talking about the spiritual condition and the emotional condition. And there is a difference. There are times when I am physically alone, but I don't feel alone and lonely, right? But when you're separated from God, I believe that is more than just the physical condition. It's not good that man should be alone, because I don't think there is a problem with you physically being alone. I think when God says it's not good that man should be alone, he's talking about more than the physical presence. He's talking about the emotional impact and spiritual impact of aloneness. Okay, that's what's not good, because there are times when it is good to be alone, right? But not to be inwardly alone in that sense. Okay, so I'm distinguishing between those two things for clarity purpose, and maybe I wasn't clear enough on that earlier. Okay. Um, when when we are in the world, one of the things we find is that there's a lot of sin in the world that magnifies this issue of aloneness and makes it worse. Okay, and that's the impact of sin in the world. The things such as abuse, betrayal, conflicts, death, so forth. We could go on and keep listing things. Often we might just use this word, rejection, to categorize a lot of those things, right? They create a feeling, a sense of rejection, and they create trauma in our life, whether it's physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, whatever the case might be. The betrayal of a parent who should have protected us and didn't, and or abused us, neglected and or I say not abused, but neglected and or abandoned, which is a huge parental betrayal that many people experience. I have a very good preacher friend who is in Mexico, who at 8 years old, his mother, they were from the Baja, Tijuana area, and his mother took him down to see family in southern Mexico. And they got there, and the next morning he woke up and she was gone, and she just abandoned him in southern Mexico and never said anything to him about it, and so there was a lot of emotional trauma from from that experience, and it's a deep betrayal. So anyway, we could go through a lot of these. If you get the emotional pain book, I deal with all this stuff here, um, and how to deal with it um, as you counsel someone. But understand that this sin that's in the world impacts us like this. Okay, and it magnifies in us that sense that we are alone. Right? Even my parents don't care for me, right? And even my family does horrible things to me and abuses me and these type of things, and it magnifies that aloneness sense. And then sinful responses is how I respond to that behavior. So my sinful responses might be my drug use, my alcohol use, my pornography viewing, those type of things. There's physical responses, but often those go back. Now let's go back to what we were talking about last night. The impact of where do those things really come from are often from our thinking processes that justify and excuse and explain why we do what we do. And in our mind, it makes perfect sense. And so on this side, when I'm dealing with someone, I will do it kind of would start over here and work out this way, but I'm going to shift it like this. But this is where we do the destructive thinking patterns, expectation, and blame shifting, and justification and so forth, and vanity and victimhood and problem enlargement. I'm not going to write all these out, but it goes down through. We talked about this last year. If you want to know more about that, there's 3 books currently on the back table on that: the Exposing Expectations, the problem fixate, or the Fixing Your Focus, and Extreme Thinking books are done. There's at least 2 more books to come, filling out that whole chart. But those books deal with this issue over here. It's the thinking processes that lead to how we respond and justification of how we respond. Okay, so my point in this is the roots that we're dealing with as we're going through the Hope program with people. You've got to see it in the right way, that what they're doing and why they're doing it aren't always the same thing. Okay. And the goal of the Hope program is to help them to come to spiritual maturity. Okay. Now, the formula for life is based on 2 Peter 1:4-8. Add to your faith virtue, and to virtue knowledge, and to knowledge temperance, and so forth. If someone has been in substance abuse just because they just want to be, they've enjoyed it, they enjoy the feeling, it's just a lust for the substance, this is probably sufficient for whatever they need. What this is a guide to spiritual growth, right? The formula for life is, we call it the ingredients for life: faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, right? It is a in-depth discipleship curriculum with an addiction focus. And someone who's just dealing with lust only just needs to grow in their Christian life to the place where they have the spiritual tools to put lust out, right? But someone who has an anchor point in an emotional trauma of their life, or someone who has an anchor point in maybe a thinking process that has gotten so out of whack that it's now anchoring them in the addiction, then you're going to have to deal with some other things. Okay. You all know what I'm talking about when I say that there are people that they've been in addiction and they get saved, and then they just immediately have zero desire to drink anymore. Right. That I know people like that. Okay. But that is not the general person that we deal with. Right. There's a lot of people that aren't that way. If they're in the Hope program, and it's not like, hey, I got saved and I smoked until the day I got saved, and then I got saved, I'm like, I'm never doing that again, and they just threw the cigarettes away, then that was just a simple lust. Okay. But for most people, there's anchor points back here that are attached to this problem of trying to solve their aloneness feelings somehow. And it can be their thought patterns, it can be their traumas, whatever the case might be, but there's an anchor there somewhere that you've got to pry off, so to speak, and get that victory. But that doesn't mean they don't need then to begin to grow, because often that thing prevents them from the growth that they really do need spiritually. Okay. So they can learn knowledge but not actually be growing because they're still anchored somewhere back here on one of those places. And that's where the personal side of the program comes in that we're trying to help identify with their help. This is why they have to be honest and they have to be willing. We have to find that point where there's that destructive thought pattern, whether it's past or present, and we have to deal with that way of thinking. And that goes to what we talked about last night, the thought life, right? And teaching them how to get victory over that. All right, do you have any questions about that?
Yes.
Go ahead.
We have a small group, maybe 1 or 2 people in our class that participating, not the teachers and stuff like that, but we're starting out with the first book, and then our second study, we all have everybody together, where we're doing the 15 Bible truths. When do we incorporate the formula of life? Because the 15 Bible truths will take 2 to 3 years. How does that formula?
I'm glad that you came again this year, because we're going to get to that. The Formula for Life is the personal book that they do at the first in the Ready segment.
Oh, it is. So
Yes.
something they take with them.
Correct.
They do it off their own, and then we check it in the first half hour.
Right. It's personal work.
Homework. Okay.
See, this is what I said. Sometimes we hear parts and we don't put them all together, right? And that's fine.
Yeah, I was here last year.
Right. I know you were. And yeah, that's fine but that's my point is that sometimes, and that validifies my point here in that you're going to have that time where you think, well, I've already gone over this. I'm not going to go over this again because I've been over it before. But that's exactly. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what you're saying. This is not a condemnation. I'm actually glad that you said that because it verifies. Okay, yeah. Remember, it's okay to repeat things, right? So the Formula for Life is that's the Ready segment work. And so they would get that material after they do the Beating the Odds book. They go into the Formula for Life and they start working through it.
And then we continue in our class beating the odds in the second period.
No, not Beating the Odds. 15 Bible Truths.
The 15.
That's in the set segment. That's the second segment. Correct. Yeah. So in the first segment, I got into some depth over here on some other subjects, but the first segment, they start with Beating the Odds. They work through that. When they finish that, they're going to get their name badge, right? And then they start getting their stars and awards that way. Then they go into the Formula for Life. And then when they need the daily devotional, we provide that. When they need the articles from Life's Toolbox, we provide that. And they work through that personally. When they first come in, we sign off on the steps that they've done. We do their challenges and all that type of stuff. And they're working through it. That's what their awards are based on. So we finish our introduction with folks. Everyone's got their work signed off. They've worked on a few steps together. And while they're working on that, as the director, I'm going around saying, you're going to need any stars? You finishing, any awards today? And then I'll fill out those slips. I'll get the stars. I'll bring them up and I'll have them available for them to get, so we've got the different stars, gold, silver. If they're in a different workbook, we have 3 different colored stars, blue, green, and red, that they can put on their badge just to indicate that they're in a different workbook than the Formula for Life. So, they don't have to announce it or anything, but I would know, they're in something different. And then, we would have our awards time at the end of the Ready segment. Okay, so I'm getting that ready though while they're doing their book work. Okay. If you go back to your outline that you have, if you're watching online, you can actually download this outline on the Hope site. It just says in the drop-down menu up there, just find the drop-down menu that says Hope Meeting Outline, and it's a PDF. You can download it and see what we're talking about here. So, prayer challenge. And then hand out the weekly prayer challenge, those that need it. We're toward the bottom of the page there. And then we go to share testimonies, all right? So we're going to take up testimonies. Who has a testimony they want to share? And I always reiterate what a testimony is. A testimony is about what God's doing in your life and what you're learning, and not about all the bad stuff you did in your past, right? We're not here to glorify the past. We're not here to glorify sin and the flesh. We're here to talk about how God's changing us and making us into his image today, right? And then, so we do testimonies, and then we take up prayer requests. You can do it one of 2 ways. You can either hand out prayer request sheets and have them fill them out and turn them in, and then read off the prayer request. That's fine. Or you can take up prayer requests from the group and just say, raise your hand if you have a prayer request. Now, we write, like when I'm doing it, I write the prayer requests on the board, and then I encourage them to transfer them to their prayer sheet, right? But that way that it's visible for everybody to, maybe write down and so forth that way. But why would I do sheets turn into slips instead of public? I only do that if I have someone who is a time dominator. They want to give a testimony, but they want to give the entire history of who this person is, where they're from, everything they've ever gone through to get to the point of, so pray for them because they have a hangnail, right? And it's like, they just take forever to get to anything. And so in that situation, if I have a person who's a real time dominator, I just go to, hey, you know what? So we can move things fast along. Let's just if you have a prayer request, fill out the sheet and turn it in. I'll just tell everybody and then we'll pray. All right. Other than that, I personally like to have them share if you have someone that's not that way. Okay. So we would do prayer, we would pray, and then we would have our awards, and we'd give out our stars, and all of that is the ready segment. I know I spent a lot of time here, but we get together, we start with the steps. We go through the introduction for newcomers with the newcomers, not with everybody. Everyone's working on their formula for life and that personal work. I gather up who's going to get an award. We have testimonies, we have prayer requests and prayer, and we have awards, and that concludes the first segment. And then we cap it off by quoting Psalm 1 together. All right. So we have the bookmarks for that purpose so that they can read and quote Psalm 1, or they can look it up in their Bible, whatever the case might be. And that kind of gives us this dividing point between the ready segment and the set segment. Psalm 1 is our dividing point. Okay. Any other questions about the ready segment? All right. Okay, so then we go into our set segment. Our set segment is where we work on the 15 Bible truths. This is the group study guide, okay? And the group study guide, we start on the first Bible truth, first verse, which is Genesis 1:1, and we are going to just work through that in discussion time. Now, I want them to be engaged and part of the process. So I have them read most of the things. I don't read it all. I have them read along. But you do need to know that sometimes you'll have people in that struggle reading and are embarrassed about that. And so before I ask someone to read publicly, I will privately ask them if they're new. Like, hey, if I ask you to read something, are you good with that? Right? So that they're not put on the spot and feel like they're, embarrassed in that way. But I like to go around the room and have people read and be engaged that way. So we'll read, I'll have someone read, like if we're starting, this is Bible truth number 6, I would have, Shane read the first paragraph and then Tara the next, and we'll go around like this, and everyone will read part of the paragraph, and then okay, brother, go ahead and read that first verse. I know it's printed in here already, but we read it out loud anyway. And then we're going to have we've got discussion questions. Now the old format had they had to write the verse in, and then the discussion questions were less direct. They were more broad. But I found that a lot of people struggle with coming up with questions to ask. So let's talk about questions for a little bit, because I don't know if you're aware of this, but God asks a lot of questions, right? And anyway, all right, so the key to good counseling is actually learning to ask questions, okay? It's not knowing everything, it's learning how to ask questions, because first of all, sometimes we can jump off into a tirade about something that really isn't the issue this person's dealing with, and we're mistaken about what the problem is. Okay, so we ask questions until we understand what the problem is, but then we don't stop asking questions about that point, because now we need to ask questions until they come to the realization that that's actually the problem. Because just because in talking to someone, I'm able to diagnose what the root issue seems to be, doesn't mean that they agree that that's the problem. And sometimes, by the way, I'm wrong. sometimes I'm wrong. And so I have to be, humble enough to continue to ask questions until there's a realization on their part that, yes, that is the problem. If I jump to, I think I know the problem, I'm going to tell you the problem, more often than not, the response is, no, I don't think that's the problem, right? Because they don't see it. And now what I'm going to end up doing is trying to argue them into acceptance, and they're already defensive about it. And it's a waste of time. So I need to continue to ask questions. I might ask more leading questions in this stage, but the goal is to ask questions. Go in Genesis back to chapter number 3, and you can just see some of the questions God asked, because they're a good guide for how to ask questions is to do it like God does. And read through the Gospels and you see Jesus doing this. He asks questions, 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 questions. All right. So in chapter number 3, of course, is where Adam and Eve sin, and we'll jump down to verse number 9. It says, the Lord, well, in verse 8, they hide themselves from the presence of God, right? In verse 9, the Lord called unto Adam and said unto him, where art thou? So the question, where? Where are you? Where are you in this? What's going on with this situation, right? Where are you in that? That's almost a different question. Like, what's going on is different than, so where are you in this situation? Like, where's your thinking here now in that regard? Now, God knew already where they were, right? He wasn't asking for his own information. He was asking for them to acknowledge and state what the reality was, right? And so, where are you? And he answers in verse 10, and then verse number 11, who told thee thou wast naked? So this question we might kind of interpret like this. Who's influencing you? Who you been talking to about this, right? Someone told you that, and they're like, no, I came up with it on my own, purely on my own. And sometimes that is the case, right? Obviously, sometimes that's the case. But I have found, especially as a pastor and dealing with a church, when everyone's saying exactly the same thing, but they all want you to believe that they came up with it on their own, they're lying. All right. Who you been talking to about that? Nobody. That's weird. Because I swear to you, you're like the third person to say exactly the same thing. You haven't talked to any of them? Well, I mean, not a lot, not really a lot. Oh, but you have a little at least, right? So, and I'm not trying to do gotcha type things by any means. I mean, in counseling, certainly not. But it is important to find out, okay, well, who have you been getting counsel from, right? Well, I looked it up on AI, right? And it told me everything I needed to know. And, I'm like, well, if it told you everything, then you probably wouldn't be here today, right? And besides that, by the way, AI is often wrong. Did you hear that about the AI that told the woman to fire her lawyer and gave her all this legal stuff to turn in? And she she fired her lawyer, turned all this stuff in, and the case went along and was almost to resolution. And the prosecutor or the opposing lawyer was looking up all the stuff and found out that AI had literally made up all of the cases that it was citing. They were all fake. And yes, and they sued the AI company over that. That's just happened not too long ago. Anyway, but that's cool, isn't it? So be careful about getting your sermons off of AI, because you never know what it's making up, right? You better be careful about that. So anyway, so who's influencing you? That's an important question. Who have you talked to, or who are you getting counsel from about this? What have you read about this? Then he says, hast thou eaten of the tree whereof I commanded thee thou shouldest not eat? So have you done something wrong? Did you do something you shouldn't have? Right? Are you involved in this X, Y, Z, whatever the case might be? That's a direct question, but it's a fact-finding question, right? And it's an important thing to come to acknowledgement. Yes, I have. I've done that. Okay. All right. So now we know. And so what his answer was, though, He did not say yes or no. He said, well, the woman thou gavest me, she gave me to be with me. She gave me of the tree and I did eat. And so he's casting away blame. But no, I do think that he isn't as much blaming her as he's blaming God. The woman thou gavest me, you gave her to me. Like, I wouldn't do this if it wasn't for what you did, giving this woman to me. It's your fault, really, God. So verse 13, the Lord God said to the woman, what is this thou hast done? And so all of these questions are what, how, where, when, right? These are fact-finding questions. Notice in chapter 3, he doesn't ask why. When you ask why, you're now looking for motive. And motive engages emotion. And you lose information when you engage emotion. Right? So all of these are who, what, when, where, how questions. In chapter number 4, he does ask why. In verse number 6, he says, why art thou wroth? Why is thy countenance fallen? Why is he asking why in chapter 4 and not in chapter 3? Because we start this interaction in chapter 4 with Cain was wroth and his countenance fell. We start it with emotion. Right? So Cain's already emotional, and so God asks the emotion question, why? What was your motive here? Right? What do you think's going on? And then he makes the question, verse 7, if thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And this is almost that kind of a reverse question, if you will. Then over in verse number, he goes on into judgment and so forth. So he asked the why question over here in chapter 4 because there's already emotion. And until you're ready to introduce the dealing with the emotional side of it, don't ask why. That's just a general rule. Okay. Let me go back to chapter 3 and give an illustration or an aspect of question asking that's an important part. Okay, so in verse number 10, he says, I heard the voice in the garden. I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. Notice in verse 11, he says, who told thee thou wast naked? Now, I mentioned already who's been influencing you, but there's another aspect to this question that's kind of a genre of questions all of its own, which is called reflective questions. And so his question has to do with the statement that was made, I was naked. Who told you were naked? Right? So there's that reflective aspect to this question. Reflective questions are helpful. They further the discussion. And you don't even always have to add many words around it. Okay? You were naked? That's a question. It's just a tone, right? And as you ask that, they're like, yeah, this and this and this and this and this. And sometimes a reflective restatement as a question can unlock a lot of information. But you need to be cautious about how much you use that because it can also be one of those things that they go, I know what you're doing, right? And it can be, a problem in that fashion. There's an entire wing of counseling, secular counseling that rests on that process. It's called reflective listening. Carl Rogers was the, author of that technique or so forth, but he says, right? But we see God doing a reflective question here already, right? But again, it's the reason it's not exclusively the best method. No, you notice God doesn't use it exclusively; He just incorporates it also. Is because Rogers' philosophy was that the answers for all of your problems are already inside of you, and the job of the counselor is just to draw out all the answers from you. But we don't believe that. We believe the answers for all the problems are in the Word of God, right? The problems are in you, but the answers aren't usually in you. Okay, so what we do need to draw out the problems, and and there's a distinction there, right? There's a lot of things, though, that secular psychology will stumble onto that does have a useful tool, but we don't do it because secular psychology has stumbled onto it as a useful tool unless we can find there's a biblical principle. And I'm not saying go to psychology and then try and find a biblical principle. I'm saying it's clear Jesus that God does this reflection here, and then we can say, well, they kind of accidentally stumbled onto a tool that doesn't make their philosophy right. It just means that they stumbled, they were like the broke clock here. The other side of that is that there are things that sound biblical and are not. For instance, in secular counseling, what's called CBT. Okay, CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy. You'll see it abbreviated often, CBT. And cognitive behavioral therapy is often a secular companion of psychopharmacology, drug therapy, where they put someone on medication and then they do CBT with them, cognitive behavioral therapy. And if you read about CBT, they'll say, well, the goal of CBT is to help identify where your wrong thinking is making you feel in a bad way, and to change your thinking so that you don't feel that way anymore or behave that way anymore. And so it sounds like what we talked about last night, right? We change the thinking, change the behavior, right? But it's not. And here's why it's important to know the distinction, because CBT has no biblical guiding principle to it. You decide what wrong behavior is and wrong feelings are in your own opinion. And they're because they have a negative effect on you. And then you decide what you think the right feeling and right behavior ought to be. And you change your thinking until you achieve the right behavior and right feeling based on what you wanted to accomplish. And when you are the measure of right and wrong, you are always going to get it wrong. All right. And so that's why CBT isn't biblical. Right? It's important to understand that just because it seems like, well, there's an aspect of truth to that, okay, but that doesn't mean that they're actually doing something right with it. Okay, so when we talk about changing our thinking, we're not talking about CBT, but people won't know that. To be honest, as I deal with people on their thinking, they're like, oh, I've heard of this. This is cognitive behavioral therapy. I'm like, no, it's really not. It's just Bible adjusted thinking, right? BAT, right? And if the Bible adjusted thinking doesn't work, we go to the bat. Pow! No, I'm just kidding. All right. So are you getting the idea of the questions here, though? And we could go through lots and lots of other places. Now, my point in all that wasn't just to get into counseling questions. My point is that's the goal here, too, to ask questions. I've given you starter questions. Starter questions, meaning that there's a lot of other questions that can be asked. Well, how do I ask those other questions? I don't have to really preliminary come up with a lot of questions. I'm going to ask questions as we have the discussion. Okay, so as we talk about these things, then we will ask more questions. And the questions will be based on what people are saying, right? And we may explore some thoughts about what people are saying. A good set group will go through 1 to 2 verses a week. All right. If you're getting through 5 or 6, you're not asking enough questions. The goal in the set group is very simple. It's not complicated. It's very simple. The goal is to help people learn how to think about and meditate on the Word of God. Remember, we talked about meditation last night? We talked about what do we do to meditate? We ask questions. We ask questions of the Scriptures, right? Well, that's what we're doing in a group setting. We're teaching them by practicality how to think about the Bible. Okay, so this is a understand how to think about and apply the Scriptures. That's the whole point of the 15 Bible truths. It is a group discussion to that end. All right, let's just do one of these, and for illustration purposes, we're in Bible truth number 6. You can choose the sin, but you can't choose the consequence. And I'm just going to give you the verse, and Shane's going to read it because he's the one that sat up front on the right in the seat of honor, right? Job 4:8. Everyone's open to discuss as we go through this. You can pull up Job 4:8 and follow along. I want feedback. This is not lecture time. This is discussion time, illustration time. Okay. All right. Job 4:8. Go ahead and read that for us, brother.
Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same.
All right. So the Bible truth here is that you can choose the sin, but you can't choose the consequence. How does this verse relate to Bible truth number 6?
Planting weeds, you're always gonna be weeds.
Okay.
Whatever you plant, whatever you sow, that's what you're gonna get out of it.
Yeah, the law of sowing and reaping. You're going to get what you plant.
If you continue to stay in that area of whatever you're going through, whatever it might be, whether it's a heavy addiction or addicted to your phone or whatever it is, if you don't find something to take the place of that, you're constantly gonna go down that road.
Right. That's good. Yeah.
I don't mean to go off track, but we've been doing the Bible truth too, and when it states how does it relate to Bible truth number 1, you have the scripture that we just read. Do we relate it to the Bible truth number 1 or the scripture that we read?
How does the scripture relate to Bible truth 1?
Well, so that question, all the questions are from the scripture for the Bible truth number 1.
Correct.
Okay, that's what. Oh, that's simple.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else? How does Job 4:8 that we just read, how does it relate to Bible truth number 1? I'm sorry, Bible truth number 6. Sorry. Yeah, I confused you there, didn't I? Sorry. To Bible, he said Bible truth 1, so that got in my head.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
How does it relate to Bible truth number 6? Yeah. You did something?
I guess this might be a little off track. If you're gonna plow iniquity, so wickedness, wouldn't it be also true that if you study the word, see righteousness, that you would be that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, the opposite would be true too. Yeah. What is iniquity?
Yeah, it's sin, it's pride.
Pride is an iniquity,
Yeah.
right? What is iniquity though?
Offending.
Broadly.
I think it's what offends God.
That's true. But what did you say? What and how? How wrong thinking? Like just you're wrong about an answer or what? Okay.
It's or defiantly stating something you know is wrong. In the Webster's it states it's injustice, unrighteousness, a deviation from, I don't even know what that word is, as iniquity of war, iniquity of slave trade. So it's unrighteousness.
Okay. In what way?
It's not according to God's will.
True. We talked about this last night, so I'm seeing if anybody remembers what we talked about last night. Inward twisting of what's right, right? It's a wrong way of thinking. You can think iniquity can be negative toward what's right, negative thinking toward righteousness, or positive thinking toward wickedness, right? And so if you plow iniquity, meaning you spend time meditating on the wrong way of thinking, and you sow wickedness, that would be maybe acting upon that wrong way of thinking, then you're going to reap the same, right? Okay, now we did several things in this first question. I'm just for teaching clarification purposes. I did several things that you may not have caught on. One, I asked a question and I just sat here without saying anything. You know what you were doing? You were thinking. And it's rude of me to ask a question and not wait till you're done thinking. So just be quiet and let them think. It's okay. We want people to think. You don't have to fill the air with your voice. Two, there was a statement about the alternate here, and that was a good statement, right? But I brought it back to the initial question, and then I asked to define what the word is. Why would I do that? Because that's part of meditating, thinking about what does this word mean, right? So in the process, all I'm doing is asking questions until we get to maybe a point where there's a short clarification here. Now I'm going to ask another question, right? But my goal is not to lecture you. My goal is to keep asking questions, and sometimes I just have to keep rephrasing. The problem is when we ask a question, we don't get the answer we want, we jump in immediately with, no, let me tell you. And we don't let people think it through more, or we don't rephrase. And so it's okay to rephrase questions. Okay, well, let me ask it a different way. Because in your mind, it makes sense how you ask it. That doesn't mean everyone else understands what you're asking. Okay, so it's okay. Ask different ways. And so we did all of that, and we were just in the first question, right? So we have to take time. We let people think. I don't just have one person answer and then go, okay, that's it, and we move on, right? I don't invalidate answers. I validated every answer that was given. They weren't wrong answers. What do I do if I get a dumb answer? I didn't, by the way, get any dumb answers, but sometimes you'll get a dumb answer, right? And you know what they say? There's no dumb questions. That's a dumb statement. All right. So because there are, in fact, dumb questions. Okay. Like one of my favorite dumb questions is, "Can I ask you a question?" No, you just did. You're already done. Bye. Get out of here. Right. So anyway, the thing is though that we do want to validate, and if someone does say something wrong, they say something, even if it's unbiblical, let's first say that's just dumb. All right. So here's how I respond. Like, well, that's an interesting way to look at that. Right. It is. I don't say that's a dumb way to look at that. Right. And say that's interesting. That's interesting. Okay. Who else has some thoughts? Right. Or if it's very unscriptural, I might say that's one way to look at that. But you know, the Bible also says this that gives it some clarification. I don't let heresy stand. I answer it. But I don't answer it in a rude way. Like that's one way to look at that. But you may not be aware that the Bible also says, right? And I give them an out. Oh, I didn't know that. Yeah, okay, that makes more sense. So in other words, I'm not trying to embarrass anybody. I'm not trying to dominate the conversation. My job is to facilitate thought and conversation, not to dominate the narrative. Does that make sense? Any questions about any of that? Yes.
Not a question, but a statement. In what I've seen, just in our group, most of the people are church members, but we have had some people come in that I have no idea who they are.
Yeah.
We can't expect that they know the Bible.
Correct.
We can't expect that they have any kind of a church life. And so if they give us an answer that we might think is ridiculous, and we act upon that, that could shut them down and they might not come back.
That's the whole, yes, you hit it perfectly. That's the goal. We want them to be able to feel comfortable speaking, giving answers. And for some people, that's very difficult. Like they're shy, and we want them to feel comfortable that it's okay. We're not going to, this is not the place for sarcasm against, something you think is a silly answer, right? Don't, if you're a naturally sarcastic, and I'm a naturally sarcastic person. Sarcasm is my spiritual gift. I feel if I don't use it, I'll lose it. But this is one of those places where I have to tamp down the gifting, and be an encourager instead of a, scoffer. Right. Sarcasm isn't all good. Yeah. Yeah.
It's one thing to be where you are, managing, facilitating, doing that. It's also vital that you have the right support from those that are with you.
Yes.
That way they don't derail and wind up doing exactly what you're saying there, you're trying to guard against. And here it comes from an angle you didn't see.
Yes.
Somebody else takes something out, and they're out, they're not coming back.
Correct. Right. That's right. And so I always, people that are faithful, I'll explain, hey, here's our goal, right? Someone may say something, and I'll sometimes say that to my group. Hey, you may say something that you're thinking, I don't know if this is right or not. Go ahead and say it. And nobody scoff at or, mock that. We want there to be a exchange of ideas. Sometimes you can't get to the good idea until you say the dumb idea, because it's in the way, right? You just got to get it out of there and say it. And then you say it. And I've had times where we've been in set groups and someone say something and they're like, wait a minute, that's dumb. Well, okay, let's move on then. But it is that way. And then the other thing about set group is sometimes you'll have people who, again, will try and dominate, and they want to lecture everybody about what their point of view. And if you have that person, we don't tell them not to speak. But what we do is we give direction of who should be speaking now. Right? They're the one that wants to start every single time. They want to say what they're going to say. And so I might say the next question here is, whose fault is it that I suffer for sin? What do you think, Charlie? Whose fault is it? Now, what I've automatically done is I've said, if this person starts speaking up, say, oh, wait. I asked Charlie first. And now they're being rude. Now, they were already being rude, but I made it clear, and most people are at least conscious enough to know that that's not the time. I need to wait till my turn now to speak. There are a few people. And if they don't get the hint, I do privately tell them, hey, when I ask other people to answer, you can't speak up. You've got to wait for them to answer. I want everyone to have a turn to talk, and you get your turn, but you got to take turns, not try and dominate the conversation, right? And if they can't agree to that, then they probably aren't ready to get help. Okay. And so that's don't be afraid of that, but give that direction. You had your hand up, brother, a second ago.
Yeah, I forgot what I was going to ask you.
Okay, that was my goal.
You succeeded. Good job.
Wasn't it? All right. Are there any questions about the set group here?
Tomorrow you won't be here.
I won't be here.
So, with the Farming for Life, we do have a new person that we have in our class who's really excelling fast. When we have somebody working with him, they should fill out the answers along with him during that time off when he comes back. Or how should that operate? I mean, we're going to give the book to the guy and says, here, do this homework on your own at home. When he comes back, someone's going to review it with him. Should the person that's working with him, or should it be the counselor stating, okay, let's check your book during that ready program? The ready. You know what I mean?
What do you mean the person that's working with him?
Well, we have guys that when somebody comes into class, I'll tell them, hey, sit with this guy so they're not alone for one thing.
Right.
But work with him when they ask questions that's off topic, then he can answer stuff like that. And when we're filling the answers going through the first book,
yeah,
we have them say yeah, and then he signs off for it so that the
Yeah.
director he can be his.
That's correct. Yeah.
We want to send. I mean,
The formula for life can be the same.
Okay, so can you work with that person during the ready program?
Yeah, that's how we do it. We call them accountability partners.
Okay, accountability.
And they're signing off on each other's work. Now, if you've got someone that's completely new, don't put them with another completely new person.
Right. Well, I'm talking to all the people that's been in our
Yeah.
program since day one.
Right. Yeah.
And working with the new people.
They're all accountability partners. That's the council. That when it says, yes.
But send home formula for life again. You do it outside of it.
Correct.
Okay.
And send home 15 Bible truths.
Well, he's got that.
Yeah. So yes, we want them to get to where they're working through Formula for Life during the week and beating the odds. We let them take it home with them. They don't leave it.
Right. The meeting, you know, safety.
Yeah. They take it home. We want them to do that personal work through the week, come back having steps that they've done. Right. And then the way this is set up now, then they can go through and read those verses. And I encourage them, go through and write down some answers of your thoughts for the next couple of verses. And, that way you have something ready to share when we go through these verses. And that just gives me opportunity to ask more questions because they already have some answers. And now it's like, okay, yeah, now we can discuss it more deeply. Then we read it the first time like we just did. And that first answer took a while, right? It's okay that it takes a while because there's people aren't responding because they're thinking. That's what we want. We want them to think. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Let's take another break and we'll be in our last segment.